Hello, friends. Joanne Goloy, the Executive Director at Radical Partners here again. Excited to welcome you to our Civic Chat number 3. Today, we have another powerful leader with us. We have James Lopez from Power You. And before we get started, James, I would love for you to share with the audience a little bit more about you and the work that you do at Power You.
Great. Thank you. I'm really happy to be on the call with you all to have this important conversation. My name is James Lopez. I'm the Executive Director of Power You Center for Social Change. And we're a community-based organization that develops the leadership of working class Black and Brown youth to win material changes in their schools, in their communities.
Thank you so much for your work, James, and thank you so much for sharing that. Your work has always been powerful and important, and it seems like 2020 is a very important year for you to continue doing that work and to keep investing in Black and Brown leaders to make sure that we all have access to the same opportunities. And I think that is a perfect segue for the conversation that we're going to be having today. For those of you who are familiar with Radical Partners, you all know that we're huge fans of always being grounded in our why and have a clear pathway to change. And how are we going to transform those communities? So this Civic Chat is precisely for that. In the first Civic Chat, we discussed what was happening this week with Gilbert from Engage Miami. Then Nikki from our team and Lauren from the Miami Foundation walked us through Vote Miami and all the resources that it provides. And today we're here with you, James, to ground us in our why. Why is voting important? Why does it matter? Why should I show up to the polls? So with that, I'm going to pass the mic back to you. And I would love for you to share with us, why do you think these elections, specifically the primaries happening tomorrow, are important?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's an important question. Regardless of how people feel about voting, the practice, how you feel about government, I think it's fair to say that we're in an unprecedented time, both for our country, both for the state, but also globally, right? Like you look nationally, what's happening after the corona pandemic and just the issues and ways it's altered everyday life. We talk about the uprisings that happened in the aftermath of the tragedy of George Floyd and several others who were killed by police, and just the way young people, especially the young people that we work with, have been on the front lines of trying to fight for change. And of course, the sort of uncertainty around the economic crises that may happen, right? After COVID, there's just a lot of uncertainties about what is going to happen. And elections are an important tactic to kind of help shape and move a path forward for everybody, to have a country that is for everyone. And you can't really do that without at least thinking about the importance of voting in elections, even in the midst of all the uncertainty.
Thank you so much for sharing, James. I think it's sometimes hard to understand the relation between this elections and the leaders who are going to be at the helm of decision making in MiamiDade and our daily lives. Can you tell us more about what decisions will these people in leadership make that are going to affect our daily lives, and perhaps provide some examples for us to understand better?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give sort of two concrete examples. You know, obviously at the federal and sort of state level, who you have in office is going to determine your everyday life when you have something like the coronavirus. You know, whether or not the state is open or not, whether or not a hospital has enough beds, or whether or not you have enough tests. Like, these are consequences of who is in leadership, who is making these decisions. And I think everyone sort of, regardless of where you fit, everyone has been feeling the challenges that have come with coronavirus and the pandemic. And even at a local level, when you think about our work, particularly at the school board level, which is often not necessarily as visible or debated or talked about as maybe a presidential or even a governor or state senator election. You know, school board members can help determine what kind of curriculum is taught in schools. They can help determine whether or not your child has access to mental health resources in their schools. It also can determine whether or not your child or your is going to be able to be supported in a virtual learning situation or being forced to be sent back to school. And I think that's the funny thing about elections, that we've been trained to not necessarily understand or see how policies are shaped until years in advance. So I think, to kind of reiterate why this moment is important, given all the uncertainties, a lot of the policies, a lot of the decisions that are going to be made by people who win or lose after this election, after tomorrow, is going to really set the tone for what's going to happen in this country, the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love how you granted in different areas that we all care about, right? Education, mental health, my workers' rights, etc. Yet we still hear hundreds of locals saying that voting or politics doesn't really affect them, that they don't really see the change that's going to happen or that has happened. What would you say to those folks?
Yeah, I think, we have an orientation where everything is inherently political. Right? The fact that what neighborhood I live in is decided or informed or influenced by political decisions. The kind of conversation that we have, the language that we use, right, it is implemented by cultural practices and policies related to, what is the dominant language that does business in this country, right? So I think what we kind of start from is, if people feel like elections or, politics doesn't actually affect them, then, I would begin to ask them questions like, okay, what made you decide to live in the neighborhood that you live in? Oh, was it affordable? What determines whether or not it was affordable? Why didn't you decide to live in some other neighborhood, right? Using people's personal experiences and kind of trying to unpack how all of this stuff is based off of decisions that people make in leadership. It's kind of how I start. And, I think that requires deep relationships. It requires intentional listening and conversations. But yeah, we've been trained, right, to think that, okay, either you're a political person, therefore you play and follow politics and you watch the news around politics, or you're a regular person who's not interested in politics. You're only worried about your job, but how much you get paid in your job, what kind of industry you happen to work for, those are all political decisions. And I think we have to kind of bridge that gap to make folks be more cognizant of that.
Well, I hope that by now, all the ones who have registered to vote have either voted, or by hearing you are definitely convinced to mail their ballot tomorrow or go to the polls and vote. Yet it is a reality, James, that Miami-Dade has thousands of residents who cannot vote, either because they are not U.S. citizens, because they're returning citizens, because they're youth under 18. Can you give us some examples of what will happen tomorrow? How can that affect them if they cannot vote?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a whole bunch of things that kind of come up for me when I hear this, especially working with mostly people who can't vote, because in this case, they're sort of young. I mean, I think there's historically, young people, folks who typically don't vote, are the ones who make significant change through protests, through getting involved in organizations that kind of force the conversation to change from people who are running. There's a lot of impact. Most of the influence that happens around conversations, topics around voting, is really informed by everyday folks who get involved, even if they're not voting. I think the other piece to it is, if we strengthen communities, I think there's been amazing initiatives of people who have made commitments to vote on behalf of somebody who can't, right? Mm-hmm. So we've seen amazing initiatives of folks who are undocumented, folks who can't necessarily vote, who have been organizing with people they have deep relationships with about the importance and the significance of them not being able to vote, and people making commitments to honor folks that aren't registered or can't to vote on their behalf. And I think that takes real strong community building that I think is really helpful in what I think about what kind of culture we want to have in this country. And I think the last thing that I would say is, there have also been movements of the folks who can't vote mobilizing to change laws and change policies to vote, right? So we think about returning citizens and Amendment 4 and the fight that comes with that. I think that's an important moment. And even nationally, we've seen in pockets like in Colorado and even in California, trying to fight for 16 and 17-year-olds to at least be able to vote in their local school board races, because they're the ones who are directly impacted by the decisions of those elected. So I think there's a whole realm of opportunities that are sort of rooted on relationships and just getting involved, not just tomorrow, but as just part of your everyday life as a person in this country.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for your powerful words, James. And I love how you ended it in terms of, yes, tomorrow is going to be a big day, but it doesn't stop there. It actually just begins, right? Like once we know who we've elected or who the majority elected, how are we going to hold them accountable? How are we going to watch what they're doing, what they're not doing, and just organizing to make sure that we're making our demands and that they're actually the leaders that we want in the upcoming years. So that said, James, it seems to me that every single person who's watching has something to steal from you and get inspired and do something about it. So thank you again for grounding us in our why and understanding what our pathway to change is right now and the importance of voting. So before I let you go, what do you suggest people do with this awareness, with this information that you gave them? What can they do after they stop watching?
Yeah, two concrete things. Definitely tomorrow, if you are able to, if you haven't sent in the ballot yet, vote, text people, text friends. Hey, did you vote today? Make it a cultural norm. And then the second thing, get involved in an organization. Even if you have limited capacity, join a neighborhood organization, join a neighborhood group chat, be in conversation with people, and not be alienated, not be just isolated from organizations, because that powerful organizations throughout history are the things that get people engaged and change our country and our world for the better.
Love it. What happens if people want to join Power You? Where can they go?
Yes, you can start off with following us on Instagram or Twitter, PowerU305. PowerU.org is our website. You can send us an email, info@poweru.org. And we have a lot of interest in recruiting people. So you can reach out to me directly. You can find us on our website, through social media, and we can find ways to have you belong to part of our family.
Love it. So we're going to make sure that we're sending people your way and sharing the links in the comments to make sure that they follow you, support your work, and get involved in community organizing, however they want to see it, which is definitely important in every single neighborhood in Miami-Dade. And just to wrap us up, in case you are still uncertain on who to vote for or where to access that information, this is also a reminder for you to visit votemiami.org, where we're consolidating resources as powerful as the work that Power You is doing and more. So there you go. You have enough homework and enough inspiration, hopefully, with this Civic Chat number 3. So thank you again, James, for this, for what's going to happen tomorrow, and for what you will be doing in the years ahead.
So thank you for the time.